Hello everyone, thanks for coming in. A little introduction, I'm Tim Strange. We're going to talk about scan alignment. I'm assuming that most of you guys that are in this webinar have actually started doing scanning, or you're at least interested and you just want to kind of see some of the stuff that is involved when we do scans. So I'm just going to jump right into the software. First of all, before I start actually doing this alignment, why would you want to align your scan data? Well, your scan data doesn't normally concern itself with an X, Y, or a Z coordinate. Should you care? Well, the reason you might care is if you're doing some retrofit, or maybe you're trying to just do some design of something you've scanned and it's a true CAD model. And sometimes you do care about the X, Y, Z as far as that is concerned. If you don't necessarily have to align your scan data, but frankly, it's a lot easier if you have planes that make sense, like the front and the top and the right, when you're doing your CAD modeling. When you do that, you always kind of concern yourself about the origin and make sure that you've got a front view that makes sense. Same thing applies here. If you don't have a front plane, you can't orient yourself nearly as easily, or you can't get started with sketching and whatnot as well. So why wouldn't you need to? If you're literally just going to scan, kind of clean your mesh up a little bit and do a 3D print, you don't have to line that up. Most softwares that go to a printer can help you align things up, but even that's a little easier if you go ahead and do it here. So we kind of talked about why you might alignment, but when do you need to do that? If you've done this and you've done an alignment later on, you'll know, because what happens is if I start sketches and I have things that are happening, when I align my mesh, it moves, the other stuff just stays behind. So everything I've built is now no longer tied to my mesh. So if I keep going with that mesh, and the mesh is what we use for all our references when we're building up, we're making our parts, everything is, again, right from the mesh. So when that reorients itself and all my sketches and features kind of stay lost in space, it's almost like starting over again. So it's really frustrating if you don't know that ahead of time. So that's why I thought it was pretty important that you guys kind of see this. Also, when we orient our part, we can concern ourselves with the origin, or just kind of lining up to X, Y, Z. Is the origin truly necessary? Maybe, maybe not. And we'll kind of see how that stuff works here. So the first software I'm going to be in is Design X, and that's our, I don't want to say normal, but that's the one we use internally all the time. It's the most comprehensive package that we use for scan data. So we can kind of do a little bit of everything in here. It's got better tools than the rest of the stuff we use. So since we have it, we use that one mostly. And then I'll do a little bit as far as the add-in. It's a GeoMagic add-in for SOLIDWORKS. So those are the two softwares I'm going to get into at least a little bit today. Okay, so I've got a part here, and you should be able to see that the planes are not centered up on this guy. So I'll try to turn him a little bit, and that probably makes more sense. You can see that none of the planes are oriented so that the mesh makes sense if I get a front view. Right, that's not a very good front view. So what I want to do is use some alignment tools. Before I do that, I also like to use regions, and I'm going to go through that really quick as well. And I'm already kind of close to this. It won't take but a minute. But if you're using these packages that have regions, they make everything a whole lot easier. It's kind of like making planes for you, and then you can use those as all kinds of references. So I'm going to go ahead and let this guy run for just a second. So what's happening is it's taking my scan data and just kind of lumping it into these regions that make sense. It's not going to put something on the back side with the front. You can see this is a pretty clean scan here. So the entire front face becomes what we call a region, and it shows as a plane. Technically not a plane, but it knows it's kind of flat. So it kind of grouped all those polygons together and make something that I can use as like a reference plane. Okay, so I can use that for alignments. I can even use that for sketches, ends of extrusions, and all that good stuff here. So what I want to do now is I want to get my scan lined up. So I'm going to go to my alignment. And again, Design X has some pretty good stuff. I always do the interactive. The wizard is pretty cool when it works. I just like to have a little bit more control as far as what's going on. I'll show you one in a minute where we actually use the wizard and we can get some cool stuff out of that. So I'm going to do an interactive. Okay, the first thing it asked, because in this scan I could have multiple sketches, it's just making sure that this is the actual sketch or mesh body, I'm sorry, that we want to actually line up right now. So that's the only one I have. Should be pretty easy. Okay, so I get two screens here, which kind of helps me when I start lining this up. You'll begin to see once I do this, one will line up a little better, one's just kind of a reference, and we'll see how all this works. So there's a couple of ways, as you can see on this. I have a 3-2-1 and an XYZ. Now, normally I like the XYZ because that's what I'm used to, is XYZ from all my CAD experience. But the 3-2-1 is pretty similar as well. But what we're doing there is we're defining a front, a top, and a right, which is kind of like an axis, but that's just not the way I see it. I'll go through the 3-2-1 first, right? So for 3-2-1 on this guy, all we need to do is pick like some sort of face, whatever, so I can have a plane. Let's pick, sure. Now my first pick here is going to set my front plane. So when it says plane, that just means front plane. Okay, and then for vector, again, this guy is setting like a top plane, so I'll just pick one of the other planes. This might not make sense as far as the view here, and then position will now set my right plane. So I can pick one of my side faces there. And you can see how that's kind of lined itself up. Again, maybe not the way you want it to line up, but that's how that works. Again, the plane is the front, and I wish it called it front, but that's just me. Plane is front, vector is top, and then position is right. And then once I like that, if I do like it, I'm good. If not, I can clear these out and try it again. But that looks pretty good to me. And now my views, I at least have a straightened up model so that now when I start sketching, again, when I reorient this, the sketches are going to stay true here. So let me just make sure that my views came in kind of like I want to see. Yeah, all looks pretty good. And there's my front, probably more of a back view, frankly, but I can get the back view as well if I really cared enough to do that. And that's probably what I would have gone back and made that. So that's either a top or a front view, kind of depending on what you're doing there. I'll also say this just kind of up front. Make sure that if you guys have questions, if you do put them in the chat, if I don't catch them immediately, I will catch them before I end the broadcast. So if I don't get to you right off the bat, just go ahead and hang out and I will get to you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the next one here. I'm going to do this one a little bit different. And I'm going to open my next model here. So this one I'm going to do a couple different ways. I'm going to show that little wizard that we kind of talked about, which is pretty cool. It gives you some options here. Now this one I've already got the regions done. I didn't want you to sit through this one. It takes a bit. I'm just going to turn them off so that they're not visible. Again, the scan data comes in weird. It usually depends more on when you first start your scan, kind of how you're aligned as far as all the dots and whatnot if you're using targets. So sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it's way off. So you can tell, again, this one, if I get like a front view here, yeah, it's kind of cockeyed, and I definitely don't want to live with that because, again, everything I do is a little more complicated when it's not lined up. And then when I rotate, it just doesn't make sense. Okay, so again, I'm going to go to alignment. And this time I'm just going to do that align wizard. Kind of the same process, mesh body, and I only have one. So this one, again, I'm in the wizard. I'm not picking all the stuff I want. So let me kind of get in here and turn this a little bit so that it makes a little more sense. Sorry if that's jerky on your end. I'll try to get in a little smoother there. So I've got all these little arrows. And you can kind of see as I hover over them, I'm getting a visual representation of what the planes would be like. Okay, so there's a couple of them that probably make more sense than the rest. Because it's a cylinder, it's going through the middle without much effort on my part, which is really nice. Really what we're trying to do is get the X and the Y kind of constrained a little bit that make more sense to us. So I'll just pick the one that looks the best, and that's the leftmost. I have a green and a blue, which is basically telling me like an X and a Y or XZ in this case. So let me go ahead and select him. Okay, so it's picked, and that's coordinate 1. I don't pay attention to the numbers. I just look at the preview here. That looks pretty good. If I didn't like it, again, I just pick something else. But you can kind of see with something like this, once you do just a few seconds worth, I have a pretty easy, straightforward, I got this lined up. This is actually a right view now. But from this point, I could go on and I could make some more sketches. So I could sketch on this plane, draw myself a couple of lines and use that to line up and reorient again. You're not stuck with one alignment. You could do another one right on the top of this. So, you could sketch right on this plane like I said, draw a couple of lines and then use those to line up your X and your Y instead of what we have now. Again, I'm on the YZ, and normally on this I like the X and the Y coming through the middle there. So I would have a little bit more work on that, but at least with a couple of seconds worth, particularly on a round, that Align Wizard just does wonders for you. Not much effort at all. So I'm going to kind of undo all that here if I can get him off in space again. Okay, so now I got my part back, kind of that weird look that it had before, and I want to do another interactive alignment. So on this one, I would need like an axis or something like that to go around, so I can just show that. Let me go ahead and set one of these guys up. So here we're going to use what we call a vector, and we can just pick, I'll pick the biggest piece that I can find. Get myself out. That's not what I want. I got to make sure I find the right setting there. And I got a quick little vector, which is the same thing as an axis as far as most CAD packages are concerned. So with that, now I can use that vector for my alignment. So I can just come in here, interactive alignment. Again, kind of the same stuff here. And this could be like an XYZ if I wanted. So my Z axis can now be that vector. If I can find it. And if that's all I was concerned about is just the Z, then that would be pretty easy fix there. Because it's round, there was a little bit more I could have done to that, but just to get a simple, again, I could start another sketch. I could sketch on the face, you know, make a couple of lines, whatever I need to do to get that lined up as far as sketching goes. But the main thing of this is you need to get something pretty square right off the bat, because everything, like I said, is just so much easier downstream. It will make more sense. And again, if you were to go ahead and model this up and then try to reorient it, everything would be off of the mesh body. And then if you need to modify, all your references are kind of gone. That wouldn't make sense to the body and the sketches that were left behind. Excuse me, left behind. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open SOLIDWORKS and kind of show you the same type of behavior in the SOLIDWORKS GeoMagic add-in. This is a 3D Systems product. They're both the same manufacturer or company that makes both these scan softwares here. So go ahead and kill this guy. On this, all I've done is I do have the add-in turned on for this, and I have already imported the mesh file, which is just an STL file. And then from there, I made an axis. I'll kind of show you how some of this stuff is done too, because it's neat to know. And then some of the other stuff is just regular SOLIDWORKS things. So I have some reference sketches here. And I use those. I used lines and whatnot to make an axis from. And then I have a point, which is just an endpoint of that too. So I have some reference sketches. Again, if you're already using SOLIDWORKS, this part right here might make a whole lot more sense to you. But I'm going to turn these guys off just for a second. And I'll edit that now. Let's make a whole new axis. I won't use this one for anything in particular, but I want to just kind of show you guys how this thing works here. So planes work kind of the same way. I'll show that too in just a second, but an axis, again, you have to have this stuff to be able to do an alignment, so it makes more sense to at least have some kind of understanding on what we're doing here. So on this, basically what you're doing is we've got this little Smart Select tool, and I'm just kind of dragging a little box window. I want to kind of bail out there. Let me right click and clear that out. So again, I'm just drawing a window, and as I drag, the further up I drag, the more of that data that it selects. So I'm still holding my mouse down. I'm just left dragging basically like a selection box. And if I keep going, it goes like all the way to the top and everything. So when you're not doing a webinar, it's a lot smoother. Okay, so that grabs, again, a lot of data. If you want to grab some of the other side, you just turn back and hold your shift and do basically the same process again. So I can grab, again, what I'm doing is just grabbing more polygons so that I know that my data is a little bit more accurate when I grab more of the round. right? If I just grab a sliver, it could be off a little easier than if I grab more and more data there. So again, all I'm trying to do is find the center of this, and that's how that axis would work. And then I'll do the same thing to make a plane. So I'll show it just again because it makes sense. Again, this thing is really cool. I wish every program had this little smart selector. It's fabulous. Once you get used to that thing, you're going to love it, and you're going to wish it all was everywhere. Every program should have it. Okay, so again, that one, I'm just dragging a little box. The plane one seemed to be a little easier because I have a smooth face there. Again, I just kind of have to watch. I drag it too far, it will start impeding on some of the other faces like that. So it's really not very hard to control, but I don't even want it bleeding down into that little cutout that's on the same surface. So let me get back down, more like that. And again, a couple seconds, I'm able to pick that. I got myself a plane. So that's how I started these sketches. I made that plane, and I made an axis, and I could use all that as references. So I started a sketch on this plane and just make some lines that look like they lined up with this, and then kind of lined it up to that axis that I had before. So let me delete those two new ones because I have ones that are the same already. And we'll just kind of see how this works. So again, it's going to be very similar because it's the same company that makes both these. I have a lot of tools in here, so it's a little different. It's just a button that says Orient Mesh. I don't have as many tabs, and it's not called alignment. So if you go from one to the other, don't get too confused. One's alignment, one is orient. Okay, so this one, once you have your reference stuff, I mean, I could make that, I could be live selecting those faces here, but I like to do them beforehand. So I have reference geometry. My first box is my origin. So because I have a point, got my point, and now I'm going to do an X and a Y or an X and a Z, or even a Y and Z. I don't need 4 references here, right? If I have my center and 2 of my axis, it will force the other one to be exactly what it needs to be in the long run anyhow. So I'm going to pick my X. Let's see, let's use 3. And for my Z axis, I'll use axis 2. So I'm going to rotate this part a little bit just so I can make sure that I got this all pointing the right direction. Looks like my Z is opposite of what I want. I want Z pointing up, so I'm going to flip in. And let's see, is my X the right way? According to my text, I don't think I like that either. There we go. So now what I'm trying to do is get this more like a front view right here. So you can see my X positive and my Z positive the way I think it should be now. And I can accept that. All right, so let me get my front view here. And let me turn my planes off real quick. So you can see it does a pretty good job just with some sketch, and I'm already in SOLIDWORKS, so this is pretty cool. If you're not already settled on a package, I would at least consider this, because if you're a SOLIDWORKS guy, this will really help you with everything there. So I want to also show you, I talked a little bit before about how things get left behind when you move things. So I'm going to show these previous sketches here before. Right, so if I was using those to model, and then I did my alignment, you can see how these guys are now lost in space. And now I can't use this mesh as a reference and still tie into that stuff. So everything I did up here before my alignment would be kind of trash. Also, kind of a neat thing to know, or I don't know if it's neat, but just make sure you know that you don't have a feature that gets created for alignments. So you can't really just edit what you just did. You can do another alignment, but that's as good as it gets. You can undo for sure, but you can't straight edit what is done. So normally what you're going to do is you're going to make stuff like this, you're going to align it, and you're going to get rid of these reference sketches that are just for the alignment. Now that's true whether I'm in the SOLIDWORKS add-in or I'm just in the Design X package. Really a standard thing to do is make some sketch geometry or even axis. And once you use them, you frankly don't need them anymore, probably, so you can get rid of that stuff. You definitely don't need the sketches and whatnot that are way off in space because they don't move with you. They're kind of trash at that point, and there's no reason to keep those in your model. Okay, I think that's all we have for today, so I'm going to just open it up for any questions, and I'll be here for the next 10-ish minutes if you guys do come up with something. Anything you want to see again, if you have questions, just let me know. And thanks again for coming.